Hey everybody, I'm Ghost Boy, and it's almost the end of February. Or should I say, Febuscary? Anyways, I've still been in the mood to keep watching scary movies that take place during winter, so today I'm talking about 10 more of the best winter horror movies. None of these movies are in any kind of order, but number one is definitely my favorite. Snow Falls. After a winter storm strands five friends in a remote cabin with no power and little food, disorientation slowly claims their sanity, as each of them becomes convinced that the snow itself has infected them with a deadly virus. Snow Falls is a psychological horror movie that just came out in 2023. The story is pretty cliche. Five friends get stranded at a cabin in the woods, and all of them start losing their minds. They never really say whether or not something paranormal is happening, or if the characters really are just hallucinating everything, or if they're experiencing mass hysteria. This movie doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it is very entertaining, and does a good job of showcasing how scary mass hysteria can be. Overall, this film wasn't as great as I was hoping it would be, but it's still a good movie, and definitely worth watching, especially in winter. 30 Days of Night. A small town in Alaska experiences a whole month of complete darkness every year. Most of the residents head south for the winter, but some people in town stay behind. However, those that stay regret their decision when a group of bloodthirsty vampires come to town. I'm not gonna lie, this film reminded me a lot of The Walking Dead, but with vampires instead of zombies. Most of this movie is about the town sheriff trying to protect a small group of survivors and hopefully keep them safe until the sun eventually comes up. This film is extremely bloody. There's lots of gore and decapitations. And the vampires look badass. There's so many different layers to this movie, and so many great ideas. Any one of them could have been a great movie. But this film puts all of those great ideas together, and all the concepts just go together so well and make one awesome story. We are still here. After the death of their son, a husband and wife move into a new house, hoping to start over and move on. But not long after moving in, they feel an evil presence in their home and realize they are not alone. I know by hearing the description of this movie, it probably sounds like the most generic, cliche movie ever, but I've really never seen a movie like this before. It's so unique, and I really can't think of anything to compare it to. This film came out in 2015, but it takes place in 1979, and it really feels like an older movie. And that was intentional because the writer and director of this film was a really big fan of old school slow burn horror movies from that time era. The first 10 minutes of this movie were a little slow, but after that the whole movie went by so fast, and I couldn't believe it when I realized I only had 20 minutes left, because I didn't want this movie to end. The designs of the spirits in this movie were incredible and extremely scary, and there's tons of references to other horror movies in this film. One of the best parts about this film was the ambiance and cinematography. This might sound like just another generic horror film, but it definitely isn't, and it's one of the most original haunted house horror movies that I've ever seen. Cold Ground. After a large amount of animal mutilations in the area, as well as a team of scientists who went missing, a group of journalists team up to investigate and document as they hike through the snow-covered mountains in search of the truth. So in my last video I talked about a movie called The Devil's Pass, also known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and this film is a little bit similar to that one, mainly just the concept of a group of people hiking through the snow and making a documentary. It's also very similar to the Blair Witch Project because the tension just keeps building up more and more as the movie goes on. At first things seem to be going well, and then slowly but surely things keep getting worse and worse. I definitely jumped a lot while I was watching this, and it really captured the feeling of being outside in the snow and feeling freezing cold. If you love movies like The Blair Witch Project and The Devil's Pass, then you will definitely love this movie too. The Lodge. During a family vacation to a remote winter cabin, the father is forced to leave suddenly for work, leaving his two children in the care of his new girlfriend Grace. Isolated and alone, A blizzard traps them inside the lodge, as terrifying events from her past begin to haunt her. I have such a love-hate relationship with this movie because I love the actors, I love the cinematography and the setting of this film, but it's probably the most depressing horror movie I've ever seen. So definitely don't watch this movie if you're feeling sad or depressed. I can't say too much about this film because a big part of it is a mystery and you don't really know what is actually happening. You don't know if the characters are being haunted, or if there's a killer stalking them, or if all the characters are already dead. The whole thing could be a dream. That's one of the best parts about this film, is trying to figure out what is actually happening. But my favorite part of this whole movie is the environment that the characters are in. They are in the middle of nowhere in this small, creepy old cabin and stuck there because of the terrible snowstorm outside. I remember the first time I watched this movie. I sat in the dark with one candle lit, and even though I was covered with blankets, I still felt so cold, because this movie does such a great job at showing how freezing cold the characters are. This is a great movie to watch in winter, but like I said earlier, definitely don't watch it if you're feeling sad or depressed. Crimson Peak. An inspiring author travels to a remote Gothic mansion in England with her new husband and his sister. There, she must decipher the mystery behind the ghostly visions that haunt her and her new home. One of my favorite parts about this movie were the ghost designs and the monster effects. The ghosts look so incredibly scary and unique and terrifying and beautiful. Most of this film takes place in a giant mansion, and the mansion is built on top of a giant clay mine, so the mansion is slowly sinking into the ground, and as a result, the walls and the floor are always dripping and leaking red clay, and it looks like the house itself is bleeding. It's also snowing for a large part of this film, and it's very spooky and aesthetically pleasing to see the white snow mixed with the red clay. And there's lots of holes in the walls and the ceiling of the mansion, so there's a few times when it's literally snowing inside of the house, and it looks really beautiful. This movie gets a little meta because the main girl is writing a ghost story, and someone tells her she needs to add a love story, and I think that's funny because this film is a gothic ghost story as well as a love story. This is a classic horror story, with a great cast, a haunted house, incredibly creepy ghosts, romance, and amazing visuals. Let It Snow. Separated from her boyfriend after sneaking onto a restricted mountain that's rumored to be haunted, a snowboarding daredevil must survive against not only the freezing temperatures, but also the psychotic snowmobile-riding killer trying to murder her. So there's really not much to this movie story-wise. It's just this girl lost in a frozen wasteland and trying to survive. And this isn't one of those survival-type movies that tries to be super realistic. For instance, the girl is outside in a blizzard for several days and doesn't at any point get frostbite. So if that type of thing is gonna bother you, then this movie isn't for you. I really like how they took a classic song like Let It Snow and turned it into such a sad and creepy song, and they also incorporate it into the story of this movie. I really like the atmosphere of this film. The snowy mountains are beautiful, and the killer is actually really cool in this movie as well. There's a twist at the end of this film, and I was really surprised by it. Overall, if the weather outside is frightful, and you don't have any place to go, then you should definitely watch Let It Snow. Shredder. A group of friends on a snowboarding trip decide to break into an abandoned ski lodge and stay there while on vacation. But what they don't know is, the ski resort has a dark past, and soon the group of friends realize they are being stalked by a mysterious killer dressed in black. I know this sounds like the most standard cliché slasher movie ever. A group of idiot friends who go somewhere they shouldn't and start getting killed off one by one. But what this movie lacks for in originality, it makes up for with some really awesome death scenes. This movie is almost exactly like the Swedish film Cold Prey, but the kills in that film weren't very great or memorable, and I think that's why this movie, Shredder, is a better winter slasher movie. I'm going to talk about my favorite death scene in the movie, and it's not really a spoiler since they literally show it on the poster. So one of the characters always carries around a video camera because they like filming stuff, I guess, and the killer grabs a ski pole and stabs it through the lens of the video camera and into the guy's head like a shish kebab, and the video camera fills with blood and starts leaking. Overall, this movie really isn't anything new that hasn't been done before, but it's a very fun slasher movie with lots of awesome kills. No Exit. Stranded at a highway rest stop during a blizzard, a recovering drug addict discovers a kidnapped child hidden in a car belonging to one of the people inside the building with her. Now she must make life or death choices as she struggles to discover who among them is the kidnapper. I'm a big fan of murder mysteries, and even though this isn't technically a murder mystery, it kind of felt like one, since one of the characters kidnapped a child, but you don't know which one it is, so you can't trust anybody and everyone is a suspect. In a lot of different horror movies these days, the characters are very bland and forgettable, so when you have a strong, likable character, it makes all the difference. And I actually really enjoyed the main character in this film. I felt bad for her, I was rooting for her, and I was scared for her. Another nice thing I can say about this movie is the cinematography was very well done, and all of the actors did a great job. This movie came out in February of 2022, and I just watched it for the first time in February of 2023. And I wish I would have watched it sooner, because I really loved this movie. And now, the number one movie on my list, and my personal favorite winter horror movie is... Let Me In. A 12-year-old boy, Owen, is a lonely outcast, bullied at school and neglected at home. He becomes friends with his new next-door neighbor, Abby, who only appears at night. The two of them quickly form a strong bond, but when the police start to investigate a series of gruesome murders, Owen begins to think that his new friend is hiding a terrible secret. If I had a nickel for every vampire horror movie that takes place during winter, then I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's strange that there's more than one. For real though, everyone always talks about 30 Days of Night, but I've never heard anybody talk about this movie, ever. This is actually the American remake of the Swedish film called Let the Right One In, and that movie is based on a book series of the same name. I was interested in watching the Swedish film until I realized it wasn't in English, but someone on Twitter let me know there was an American remake. So I watched it, and holy shit, I'm so glad I did, because this is one of my new favorite movies ever. Chloe Grace Moretz plays one of the 2 main characters in this film, and I gotta say, she is an extremely talented actress, and a very underrated scream queen. She's been in so many horror movies. Dark Shadows, the remake of Carrie, The Addams Family, Hallowed Ground, and tons of other horror movies. Getting back to the movie though, I really don't want to spoil anything, but there's serial killers, possibly maybe some supernatural creatures involved, and tons of blood and gore and violent death scenes. But the thing I liked most about this movie was the friendship and relationship between the 2 main characters. They are so adorable, and that's coming from someone who almost always gets annoyed by relationships in movies. But the 2 main characters in this film are just so likable and relatable, and you feel bad for them because they really don't have anyone else but each other, and you don't know who's gonna live and who's gonna die, but they just have such an amazing, heartwarming friendship, and that's what makes this movie so great. And that's why it's the number 1 movie on my list, and one of the best winter horror movies of all time. Well everybody, that's the end of my list. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you check out some of these great winter horror movies. Until next time, stay warm and stay spooky.
Oh, the